Bienvenidos, Lise Bjerno y Erick Christensen, a este encuentro. Es un auténtico honor y es una enorme experiencia novedosa, digamos, para nosotros que participen ustedes desde Dinamarca, siendo Erick un músico, musicólogo y pensador musical muy conocido en México a través de sus libros en torno de la escucha. Ha estado en la Cremus en las épocas iniciales, donde tuvo como alumnos, creo yo, que a Hugo Solís, a Víctor Adán, al menos, entre otros, y que contribuyó muchísimo a la formación de este grupo inicial, que era un grupo piloto. La presentación hoy de Erick, me parece impresionante que seamos casi a las 3:15 o 3:17, pero sí haremos esta presentación para ir de inmediato a la escucha de ustedes dos sobre el tema Pithoprakta de Iannis Xenakis, una investigación fenomenológica. Quisiera antes hacer una muy breve presentación de Erick y de Lise. Erick Christensen, Dinamarca, doctor en musicología especializado en la escucha musical, fenomenología y música relacionada con las neurociencias. Productor de programas de música contemporánea para la Danish Broadcasting Corporation entre 1978 y 2007. Fue conferencista en la Universidad de Copenhague en 2007-2008 y conferencista invitado en Estados Unidos, México y Argentina. En 2012 defendió la tesis titulada Music Listening, Music Therapy, Phenomenology and Neuroscience en la Universidad de Aalborg, Dinamarca. Actualmente trabaja en dicha universidad en el Departamento de Comunicación y Psicología como investigador. Sus publicaciones pueden consultarse en su página. Lise Bjerno, bienvenida. Dinamarca también, directora y compositora, quien además de sus actividades musicales tiene una maestría en desarrollo de recursos humanos y liderazgo. Lise es conferencista y tallerista sobre los temas de comunicación, innovación, sustentabilidad y cambio climático. Ahí está su dirección en nuestro programa. Bienvenidos, muy bienvenidos. Ustedes harán su presentación en inglés, a menos que Erick quiera pasar, y Lise también, hacerla en español, pero no creo que sean tan audaces para hacer ese cambio de último minuto. Bueno, muy bienvenidos a ambos y muchas gracias nuevamente por participar con nosotros.
Nada más antes de que empiecen, perdón, les recuerdo que
¿Sí?
si quieren escuchar esta charla en español, hay que activar el globito que está abajo, bueno, el como mundito que está ahí y seleccionar el idioma para que puedan escuchar la traducción simultánea. Y después volver a seleccionar el globito y ponerle mute al sonido principal para que no escuchen las dos cosas al mismo tiempo. Nada más eso, gracias. Hola Erick, saludos.
Saludos, gracias.
Ya. Pues a ustedes la presentación. Chao.
Yeah, see. So thank you very much, Julio, for this very kind introduction. And thank you for inviting us. We will present in English and we'll share our slides. Let's see if that happens. Yes, we'll share the sound as well. And the sound is very important. You're going to listen to quite a few sound examples of Xenakis Pithoprakta. So if you wish, you can put on your headphones to get a good sound quality. But we also warn you that some of Xenakis' music is very noisy. Yeah. So we share our slides. Yes. And we're going to present phenomenological investigation. So phenomenology is about listening. And we have listened to Pithoprakta for many hours. We listened to this old recording from 1965 by the French radio, directed by Maurice Leroux, which is, well, let's call it the original recording of Xenakis. And you may know that the instrumentation of Pithoprakta is very special. It is for strings, 46 strings, but they all play their own voice. They are divisi. They don't play the same. So yeah, he has his reasons, and we're going to talk a little about that. Now, with the strings, he has trombone and trombones which add in second. we'll listen to this very special effect, trombones mixing with divisi strings. And then one percussionist, and he has a woodblock, which has a very sharp sound, a xylophone, which has a delicate sound. And as you know, the material that Xenakis composed in 1956 were sound masses. And Pablo Araya have given us a good introduction to the sound masses inspired by sound masses which Xenakis heard in nature, such as raindrops or cicadas, or human beings, the sound of a crowd of people, especially in demonstrations in Athens, demonstrations against the occupying troops. And as you know, Xenakis was himself wounded. So he had his whole life very, very clear memories of these demonstrations. Now he composed sound masses, and these are composed of points, that is pizzicato or in strings, and movements, also glissandi, which of course the string instruments are very good at producing as well pizzicati and glissandi, plus sostenuto, continuous sound, and silence. There are quite a few remarkable silences in Xenakis' Pithoprakta. So the plan of our presentation is we tell you a little about our method and the background of the method. We tell you about our listening experiences and a few very brief remarks at the end. So what we like to do is active investigation of the experience work and experience, and reflect on the process that's going of experience. In practice, experimental phenomenology, that means, and we perform phenomenological variations. We change between focusing differently with great variation, focusing on the music. We may utilize open listening, music-focused listening, and hermeneutical listening. So what is that? Phenomenological variations. The open listening means we just listen like any music listener would do it. We listen without deliberate focus. We are open to anything that might appear in the music. But we can decide to focus in very special ways to the music, to listen for various musical features. Or we can change our mind and we can listen for interpretations, the meanings and emotions in the music. And we did not invent this ourselves. We built our method on the music phenomenology of three great American phenomenologists. Two were musicologists and one was a philosopher. So this was Thomas Clifton, which we call the enthusiastic discoverer. He wrote an important book called Music as Heard, a study in applied music phenomenology. Next, Lawrence Ferrara, also an American musicologist. He is a pragmatic researcher. And he's the one who suggested open, focused, and hermeneutical listening. He wrote an excellent article called Phenomenology as a Tool for Musical Analysis. And by the way, the piece he listened to was exactly the piece by Varese, Poème électronique, which was played in the Philips Pavilion, which Xenakis had built for the Brussels Exposition, World Exhibition in 1958. The real philosopher of those three is Don Eide, who is still alive. He's an elderly man. He has written many books. We have in particular benefited from one book called Listening and Voice and another called Experimental Phenomenology. And we have combined his wisdom from these books in our method. And he's also the one who guides how to do a proper phenomenological investigation. He tells us and writes his practice and rules for phenomenological investigation. And these music phenomenologists had their background in the real philosophers Edmund Husserl, Martin Heidegger, and Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And we can sketch easily their thoughts. There's a first phenomenology. Husserl was the inventor, and he invented the focused description. In our case, the music-focused description, to focus on the presence of the music, the structure of the music, and the characteristic features. Next comes the second phenomenology, proposed by Martin Heidegger and Maurice Merleau-Ponty, and that allows us to present our interpretation of the meaning and the emotions in the music. So we include the human existence or our own life world and the bodily feelings, the bodily emotions. Donaire gave us rules for phenomenological investigation. The first rule is describe, don't explain. So you will see that we have now heard a lot of explanations of Xenakis' music. We now change to the description of Xenakis as heard. And we perform phenomenological variations, changing our focus. And following Eide, we regard all experienced phenomena as equally real. And the very special thing that we do is that we include two persons. That's also a good advice by Donaire, include intersubjective verification. So we combine first-person experience with a discussion between two subjects. And this is what we did. We're two persons, Eric, that's me, and Lise. Hi, Lise. Hello, yeah. Yeah, I conducted a number of preparatory listenings in order to collect questions and listening tasks and divide the piece into sections and subsections. So that's important to find out how can you focus, what's important to ask, and what tasks can you perform in listening. Then we conducted numerous listenings. We haven't counted them, but we actually passed 3 days, 4 hours every day, listening to Pithoprakta and performed these variations, open, music-focused, and hermeneutical listening. So I had the pleasure of planning the progression and asking questions, and Lise provided answers and descriptions while I notated everything. So we had to divide this piece. It's 99 minutes and 45 seconds in this recording. And actually, Xenakis has composed his piece in sections, 4 sections with silences in between. And they are almost the same duration, approximately 2.5 minutes. We decided to divide them in subsections. And why? Well, that's in order to what we call to facilitate retention in short-time memory. Now, phenomenological listening is based on memory. We listen, we describe, we listen again and describe again, but the memory has its limits. So 2.5 minutes is a lot of time, a lot of music to keep in your memory. So we divided the piece in subsections, as you can see, 1 minute, 1.5 minutes. And in that way, we succeeded in describing the large sections and the smaller sections of Xenakis' piece. So now we'll share our listening experiences. I have to check this. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, I share the slides and I share the sound. That's important. Mm-hmm. So first the music-focused listening, and we decided to perform certain tasks. In these sound masses, we can listen for characteristic features. We can listen for densities. The sound may appear very dense or very transparent so that you can look through it. We listen to sonorities, the special qualities of the sound, including the timbre and harmony. And we listen for transformations. So Xenakis was very interested in transformations. To change from one kind of sound mass almost imperceptibly and gradually to another kind. And you will hear he could compose a fantastic variety of sound masses. So here we have Xenakis' 4 sections, section 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you'll get some examples of the characteristic features in those sections. Xenakis began Pithoprakta by tapping on wood. Imagine those 46 strings, violins, violas, cellos, and double basses, all tapping their wooden instruments so that you get the resonance. So let's listen to the sound of tapping on wood. That's the beginning of Pithoprakta. And once in a conversation, when Xenakis was asked about why do you start like this, oh, he said, well, it's much easier than using percussion. You don't need all those instruments on the stage. You can just let the string players tap their instruments. But of course, they can produce sounds in many other ways. They can produce sounds with their bows, arco playing. So now listen when Xenakis in the first section mixes this tapping on wood with the arco strings. In the second section, you will hear quite another type of sound. Continuous sound, sustained sound, which we call a broad belt of sound. So you also heard the sound of the wood block, a very sharp sound. You heard the xylophone. And these cracks of the wood block come again and again in all sections. It's my idea that Xenakis added that to tell people, hey, don't fall asleep. Stay attentive and listen to what's going on. And the next third section, you will hear a very complex polyphony going out, swarms of pizzicati and glissandi and rumbling sounds at the bottom. So this is complexity. In the fourth section, you will hear clarity, a polyphony of glissandi. So these are some characteristic features of Xenakis' own 4 sections. Now our next task. Our next task is to listen for densities. A sound mass may be very dense, or it may be transparent. You remember now those strings tapping the instruments. At the beginning, there were just a few taps. Now, in the following, you hear more and more sounds. And it's relevant to say that Xenakis actually took his point of departure in the sounds of nature, including raindrops. In the section 3, Xenakis composes a very complex sound mass. And here he actually depicts another kind of natural phenomenon. And he writes a note in his score. This is a nebula of sounds, galactic configurations. Oh, sorry. I'll try again. We'll get the tapping again, okay. Now the dense complex sound. And the image you see is an image of the university approximately 13 billion years ago. It was photographed by the brand new James Webb telescope, which can see very far back in time. This was a dense, complex sound. Now listen to a transparent sound, a flow of glissandi. Our next task was to listen for sonorities. And well, of course, sonorities are composed by harmony and timbre. And first we have the continuous background, this belt of harmony and timbre. So this is rather peaceful, except for these cracks of the woodblock. The next section, section 3, is not so peaceful. You have lots of activity in the strings, but for the first time, and the only time, 2 trombones are added to the strings. And there are 2 trombones so that those tones can interfere. So here you can hear that Xenakis was also pleased by composing a very simple rhythm. The last sonority is again a continuous sound, but this sound has sharpness. It's an increasing noise. Next, we listen for transformations, going from one kind of sound mass and gradually transforming it into another one. Again, you remember the first section, tapping, and gradually the arco strings take over and dominate the soundscape. And he can transform a mass of dense glissandi into a transparent flow of glissandi. And the noise may have internal movement, and this movement is gradually transformed into a sustained sound. And when this sustained sound has become massive, it gradually almost evaporates. So these were our music-focused experiences. Now we change to the second phenomenology, the hermeneutic listening, and we listen for interpretations, the aesthetic experiences, the meanings of the music, and the emotions and possible images. From section 2, we present 3 different kinds of movement, all rather pleasant. First, a lively movement. Next, the gentle background sound, which you now remember. And a small section which we like very much. Glissandi, gliding in the air, elegant like a ballet. So as you possibly expect, Xenakis' music is not only elegance and beauty and pleasant sound, it can also be threatening. And when those trombones come in some of our listenings, we had the feeling there's something terrible going on. These trombones, mixing with very active strings, might be airplanes flying low and indicating war. we can add that we listened to Pithoprakta in this spring, and as you know, the war in Ukraine had begun, so it may have influenced our impression of this sound. The last section, 3 different emotions. First, something very peculiar, a very short event. That's unusual for Xenakis. It's the only short event. There's silence before, silence afterwards. And we were wondering, this movement, these gestures, what is happening? We found that surprising. Afterwards came one of the most beautiful sections. We heard it as seductive underwater singing. Well, Xenakis was Greek, and he of course knew the Greek mythology. So, well, we guess, we don't know, but we guess that he had memories of these mermaids underwater singing to seduce the poor sailors. And in Greek mythology, these mermaids were called sirens. In the last section, you have another kind of siren, an alarm, like an air raid alarm. So let's sum up our impressions of Pithoprakta. Section 1, contrasts between the tapping on wood, very simple and transparent, and on the other hand, the arco strings, complex sound and dense sound. Section 2, we consider simply beautiful. In section 3, you had the universe picture, the nebula, and the possible thread of these low-flying trombones. Section 4 was beautiful, like the siren song underwater, but beauty was disturbed by alarm, which Xenakis had, of course, experienced many times himself. Here's a detailed overview. If you find the slides, which will be available to you, you can see the sections, the subsections, the beginnings, the emotional experience, etc. And you may even study the score if you wish, and see what bars in the score correspond to our sections and subsections. Of course, you know from today's talks and from reading about Xenakis that Pithoprakta means actions through probabilities. And you know that Xenakis created sound masses on the basis of mathematical calculations of probabilities, like Pablo Araya has explained to us. In this image, you see the sketches by Xenakis, how he sketched all the divisi pizzicati glissandi, a sound beginning pizzicato and continuing glissandi. This is our section 2. So he began composing in graphical score, and afterwards he wrote it out in the musical score. And many musicologists and philosophers have reflected a lot on these mathematical calculations of Xenakis. But for Xenakis, the calculations was not the most important aspect of his composition. Calculations were tools. He used the theories of different natural scientists in order to create very different sound masses. But behind this lies his own visions. So when he talked to Balin Varga in the conversation book, he said, "Scientific thought is only a means with which to realize my ideas, which are not of scientific origin. These ideas are born of intuition, some kind of vision." And in his own book Musique Architecture, he wrote, "Finally, the instinct and the subjective choice are the only guarantees of the value of a work." So mathematics was important for Xenakis, very important as a tool, but he has had his own values and visions. If you want to hear the whole piece, you can go to YouTube. You can hear this same French Radio Symphony Orchestra recording, and you'll see the score, this enormous score rolling by as you listen to it. So you have the link here to watch on YouTube. There's another link here, it's another recording, and there's a score animation by a very clever musicologist called Pierre Carré, a Frenchman, who actually imitated Xenakis' sketches, so you can see the whole piece rolling over the screen when you listen to it. So these were our experiences and our interpretations. So thank you for listening, and remember that phenomenological investigation discovers unnoticed aspects of the world. It uncovers the wealth and complexity of human experience. And last but not least, phenomenology provokes the sense of wonder.
Thank you very much, Eric and Lise, for this presentation, so clear, so precise to approach this subject. One of the main ideas you are speaking about, we have been discussing for many years around what you called at that time a theory, and I was not convinced, but with the time and observing how difficult it is to understand the music, at least the imagination, or even to listen to the music, your contribution really is a theory. It's a theory about listening, something that we miss, that we need today to understand much better what we hear. We are not accustomed to understand music in terms out of the conventional music writing. We always think that analysis should come from the text. And what you're doing is to describe what is saying or what is implying the music we listen, not necessarily from the score. That's something extremely revealing that I think Xenakis himself has contributed, as well as Varese or Stravinsky, to put a question mark on the music they created. Is that music described in other terms than verbally? Is only described in terms of musical science, or we need something more? And that's what you have demonstrated brilliantly today. Really, thank you very much. I'm sure that many of the present will have some questions for you, and I think you have certainly all the answers. ¿Alguien tiene preguntas que hacer al doctor Christensen?
Yo quiero preguntar algo.
¿Vas?
Okay. I want to ask you, how did you feel after listening to Pithoprakta 3 days, 4 hours each day, right? And I want to ask Lise how he felt about this experience, and if you had some perception difference between the listening of Lise and Eric due to gender terms, especially when you describe the emotions of the extracts that you heard. If you have some difference in this feeling about the sound. That's it.
Well, I think the war, I heard the war the first time and the second time and the 20th time, and I get terrified every time. And Eric, you didn't hear it as airplanes.
I didn't hear the aeroplanes. I heard something else because I play the trombone myself. So I was happy to hear the sound of trombones mixing with the strings. And I also liked the interference of those trombones gliding very close to each other. But of course, Lise insisted that this is a piece which deals with war and sounds like war. And I can accept that. I can accept hearing it as war. And of course, in this time of war, which we are living right now, it's obvious that you can hear the war. And when you know about Xenakis' experiences, how he tells about the demonstrations in Athens, a crowd of people walking through the streets, shouting rhythmic slogans. Then the slogan goes down the mass to the end of the crowd, but then come the machine guns, and the machine guns disperse this crowd of human people, and it all becomes chaos. I don't know if we heard it, but what do you think, Lisa?
I think I heard right there some other war pictures, bodies who were killed. They were just lying there shaking. Bodies who are not really dead, but almost. So they are the last cramps. It's not very nice. And then I had this alarm, and the very end of it, it's a really rough sound where the string players are playing, all the brightest tone they can do. And I was just, oh no, not again. And you said, oh, it's a nice way to end this. So, wow.
Well, the sound disappearing into open air. Yeah.
I was fearing it to come every time.
Yes, because after we had that rehearsal of your presentation, Erick, I heard Pithoprakta again, and I was almost crying. And since then, I hear Glissando, and I am like very sensitive about it, because after you showed me this perception of this kind of listening, I was really moved. And I think that I could hear Xenakis from another side of perception that I wasn't aware before. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience. Could you also hear the beauty in some sections?
Of course, and that I think that moved me most, because after listening to these sounds and maybe the war and everything, then you can listen that beauty, and it's moving. I wanted to cry. Yeah, really, really moving for me, that experience after listening to your.
Of course, the contrasts are very important, and we were also happy to feel and to experience that Xenakis has these human visions. He wants to show, according to our listening, the beauty of the life and the tragedy of destruction.
Yeah, really moving for me.
I would like to add something which is part of the experience of perceiving Xenakis. I remember in 67 or 68, Maurice Fleuret at the Musée d'Art Moderne in Paris was introducing Xenakis' music by playing in loudspeakers, his orchestral music or instrumental music. And then came the moment to listen Pithoprakta. At the moment he has been speaking in an interview with Fleuret about all the science, all the mathematics which were implied in his music, etc. So came Pithoprakta, and at the end, Xenakis said, does anyone has questions or ideas around? And a very French, more French could not be, lady said, oh yes, how wonderful geometries, triangles, hexagons, pentagons, octagons. Oh, I listen to numbers in the sky in my mind. So that was exactly the anti-perception that people should have about Xenakis, but he was responsible for provoking those stupid perceptions in audience. So suddenly came a very young student which came from 68, with beers, very, very angry. And he raised his hand, said, "I'm sorry. I listen in the war. I listen metrallettes, I listen guns, I listen cries of people. That's what I listen." And then Xenakis says, yes, that was it. But he was at that time a little bit shy to discover that he was a human being over everything. He wanted to be behind a mask, a Greek mask, as Pythagoras, behind the wall, not to be seen. But this sensitive student gave a cue to understand him. And then open real a way. And as you have opened the way to listen Xenakis and many other pieces of music. So I would say thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Julio, thank you for adding this to this very fine story. Yeah.
Well, it's a very snobbish story, and should start in France, certainly. Mais bien sûr.
Mauricio quiere también decir algo.
Okay.
Hola, Erick.
Hello. Yeah. Pleased to meet you again. Yeah.
Nice to meet you again. I have a questions. Since I'm kind of in the same kind of field of research as you guys in phenomenology, could you elaborate what kind of phenomenological listening reveals in contrast to conventional musicological analysis?
I could quote again another you the sense wonder. When you listen many times, you listen that experience that you can go deeper and deeper into the music, and you have not heard the whole thing on the first and not on the 25th listening, and it continues. So, well, you don't know really what to expect. And good music, important music, has many layers, and you discover those layers one by one, and you ask questions and you get new answers. And I do recommend the two-person listening, because you get, well, it's a gift to hear an opinion of another person, and to find out, oh, yes, it can be heard like that. So the real gift of phenomenology is going deep into the music and wondering what you can discover.
Yes, and I think that this is especially true for a music such as Xenakis, and maybe contemporary music. That is a music that is not common for many people, right? So this tool could be a bridge to understanding more of this such music. Thank you, guys.
Yes, we can add that we listened to a study by Nancaro, and our listening is published in yeah. So yes. You can find that, and you can listen to Nancaro probably with new ears. But I also recommend this this recording, this live score by this French musicologist. So listen to it on YouTube. But I would also say, okay, if you listen to this animation, you may be tempted to say, "Oh, is that all?" But it's not all. Close your eyes and listen again.
Sure.
So actually, we hadn't finished yet.
Oh, okay.
The feeling after listening to 3 days of Pithoprakta is, oh, we want to hear it again.
Yeah, I heard some new things when you were presenting.
Now you are more Mexicans than Mexicans. Come on. Oh, you have not ended. I mean, you have ended your lecture, but you have not ended your analysis on Pithoprakta. That's what you mean.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. I thought you were starting again your lectures. Oh God. Where's the Mexicans? Huh?
You'll get another hour.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, not this time. Next time.
Do you have, Victor, any question or any comment to Erick? So you made something like 25 years ago, no?
20 maybe. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess I was curious about. So you have many ways of listening, the hermeneutic listening, and you described you're listening for certain things like interpretation, aesthetics, experience, and then in the other kind of listening, which I forget what you called it, densities, sonorities, transformations. Are these things you specifically listen for when you listen to the music? And if so, how do you pick what to listen for? Like, where did densities come from and transformations? How do you pick to listen to those things?
In this case, I should begin, before we met, Lisa and I, and listened for these 3 days, I listened 15 times to Pithoprakta in order to ask questions and find out different tasks. The list of questions is much longer, and when we come to the publication, I'll discover what else we could listen for, because, as I say, we haven't finished. The densities and the transformations are actually Xenakis' own ideas. Of course, sound masses have certain characteristics, and one very important characteristic is the density, whether you can, so to speak, look through it, or whether it is massive and, you are overwhelmed by the complexity. And of course, the sonority, you always listen for sonority in any kind of music. And it was Xenakis' own word. He wants to compose transformations. And we could show 15, 20 transformations next time we meet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it sounds like it's very dependent on the piece. Like if you listen to some other composer's piece, very different, you would be looking potentially for other things to question about.
Absolutely, yes. And in preparing the listening, the questions come up, and you find out, oh, what do we have to discover? Yeah, and as you say, it depends on the piece.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Yeah. Let me tell you something to add to your lecture. As you said, describe, not explain. That's an idea that I didn't knew it. But normally in my classes, when I analyze the imagination of students, I say that. Describe, don't explain. If you explain, everything is over. But if you describe, it's so rich. What we can say about what we imagine or conceive or perceive. It's much more rich than what we think. At least in arts, that's essential.
Thank you. You are a real Mexican phenomenologist.
Pre-Columbian, post-Columbian.
Pre-Columbian, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the main idea. The students need to describe their fantasies. If they start to explain it, that will be a shame, no? That would be to go to conservatory back.
Yeah.
In the conservatory, you need to explain. That's the difference between composing and creating music. Composing is more explaining. Composing is explaining. Creating is describing. Fine. I think, because you don't have the solution yet. Not even
Thank you.
No. Okay. Well. I think we say you goodbye, because it's already 15:15, not 15:19.
Well, it's not midnight yet.
That's an scandal. That's an scandal. For our...
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much
to meet you. Yeah.
Nice
Erick and Lise, thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye. Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.